Claire Bennett looked exactly like someone I should have recognized immediately, and different enough that I stared for a second too long. She came through the sliding doors at Denver International with one suitcase, a canvas shoulder bag, and the kind of expression people wear when they have already spotted you before you spot them. 5 years had changed the details. Her hair was shorter, her posture more confident, and the woman walking toward me did not carry herself like the 24-year-old who used to sit on her mother's porch barefoot and complain about Denver winters. She stopped in front of me, looked at my truck keys, then at my face. Nolan Pierce. I smiled. Claire Bennett. Good. You remember me. Your mother gave me several clues. She rolled her eyes, hugged me before I could decide whether a handshake would have been safer, and stepped back without any sign that she found the hug unusual. Then she tilted her head and asked, "Did you miss me?" That was not the first question I expected after 5 years. My name is Nolan Pierce. I was 34, worked as a commercial electrician, and had lived next door to Claire's mother, Diane, for almost 8 years. Diane had called that afternoon because an appointment was running late, and Claire's flight had landed earlier than expected. Picking her up seemed simple. I had driven Diane to the mechanic, carried furniture into her basement, and once spent a Sunday afternoon helping her figure out why half the outlets in her kitchen had stopped working. Airport pickup belonged in the same category until Claire looked at me like there was a correct answer. I noticed you weren't around, I said. Her mouth curved. That is a very Nolan answer. You haven't seen me in 5 years. You can't possibly remember what a Nolan answer sounds like. You answer exactly the question somebody asks, especially when the honest answer would create a second question. She reached for the passenger door. So yes, I remember. I put her suitcase in the bed of the truck and climbed behind the wheel. Claire buckled in, adjusted the air vent, and immediately moved it back to the angle she used to prefer when I drove her places years earlier. I noticed. Apparently she noticed me noticing. What? She asked. Nothing. There it is again. What is? The face you make when you remember something you weren't planning to admit you remember. I pulled away from the curb. You used to point every air vent directly at yourself, and then complain you were cold. You remember my ventilation habits. Occupational hazard. You're an electrician. Electricity eventually becomes air conditioning if you ask the right contractor. Claire laughed, and the sound was familiar enough to make the 5 years between us feel strangely negotiable. Traffic gave us almost an hour together. She asked about Diane first, then the neighborhood, then whether the old maple tree between our houses had finally died. I told her it was still alive mostly out of spite. She remembered the time a branch had dropped onto my fence during a storm, and I remembered that she had brought me iced coffee while I cut it apart the next morning. Vanilla latte, she said. Too sweet. You drank the whole thing. I was being polite. You asked me to get another one 2 days later. I glanced at her. She was smiling out the windshield. You remember that too? I asked. Nolan. I remember you drove across town, because I said the place near Mom's house made terrible coffee. I was going there anyway. You absolutely were not. She turned toward me. You always did that. You'd do something nice, and then invent a practical reason afterward, so nobody could accuse you of meaning anything by it. I should have laughed that off. Instead, I remembered too many other things at once. Claire sitting on the edge of my tailgate while I replaced a porch light for Diane. Claire asking if I wanted company on a hardware store run, and somehow turning 15 minutes into an hour. Claire standing beside my truck the night before she moved to Seattle, saying she hated goodbyes, and then staying there long enough that neither of us seemed willing to say one. Nothing had happened. That was the point I had repeated to myself afterward. No kiss, no confession, no promise. Just enough unfinished chemistry to be inconvenient for several months, and easy to dismiss Once there were 2 states between us. You remembered plenty too, Claire said. I realized I had gone quiet. Some things. Convenient answer. You're interrogating your ride from the airport. I haven't decided whether to tip you yet. I asked how long she was staying, because that felt safer than asking what exactly she remembered about the night she left. 6 weeks, she said. Maybe longer. I looked over. Maybe. My company's letting me work remotely through September. I'm figuring out whether I want Denver to be home again, or whether I just missed being somewhere familiar. There was no dramatic explanation behind it. She liked her work. Seattle had been good to her. She had friends there, and a life she had built without anyone's help. She was simply tired of treating every place she lived like the next one might fit better. Mom thinks I've already decided, she added. I haven't. And you're asking the neighbor for professional guidance? Definitely not. She smiled. You'd make a spreadsheet. That is a vicious stereotype. You color code your breaker labels. That's competence. When we turned onto our street, Claire went quiet. Diane's house was exactly where she had left it. Pale brick, white porch railing. Too many flower pots near the steps. My house sat next door behind the same low fence. Although I had replaced the roof and painted the front door since Claire last saw it. She noticed both before I even parked. You bought it, she said. 3 years ago. You used to complain about the landlord every week. I solved the problem permanently. Of course you did. I carried her suitcase to Diane's porch. Claire stopped before going inside and looked across the yard toward my place. So you're still right there. Apparently. Good. The word came too quickly to be casual. I handed her the suitcase handle. Welcome home, Claire. She looked at me for a moment. You know what's funny? Usually when you start that way. No. I asked if you missed me, and you still haven't really answered. I said I noticed you were gone. Exactly. She backed toward the front door, smiling now. We'll work on that. Then she disappeared inside before I could decide whether that had been a promise or a threat. The next evening, someone knocked on my door just after 7. Claire stood on the porch in jeans and a light sweater, holding 2 bottles of sparkling water. Mom's watching a documentary about competitive gardening, she said. I need an evacuation plan. I stepped aside. Come in. She did not move. Actually, I have a rule. You have been back 24 hours. Plenty of time to develop policy. She held out one of the bottles to me. If we're going to spend time together while I'm here, we're not going to spend 6 weeks recreating everything we did 5 years ago, just because it's comfortable. I looked at her. What exactly do you think we did 5 years ago? Claire smiled slowly. See, that's why we need the rule. Claire kept the rule simple enough that I had no excuse to misunderstand it. New places only. No diner, where we used to split fries at midnight. No walks past the park, where she once talked me into sitting on a swing designed for children. No hardware store runs disguised as errands, when both of us knew she could have stayed home. If we keep going back to the same places, she said, following me inside, we're going to start confusing memory with chemistry. I took the sparkling water from her and leaned against the kitchen counter. You've been here one day and already decided we have chemistry? Claire twisted the cap off her bottle. You're doing the thing again. What thing? Answering the least dangerous part of the sentence. I laughed. Fine. What's the alternative? She pointed toward the door. There's a food truck market downtown I've never been to. You? No. Good. Put on shoes. That became the pattern faster than I expected. Claire did not wait for coincidence to produce time together. She knocked on my door on Wednesday. Because she had found an outdoor market neither of us knew. On Friday, she texted me the address of a bookstore cafe and asked whether electricians were allowed near books without diagrams. On Sunday, she appeared beside my truck while I was loading groceries and announced she was coming. Because Diane had sent her for tomatoes and somehow, buying tomatoes alone had become unacceptable. None of it felt like dating yet, which was probably why it worked. We were not trying to recreate the almost relationship from 5 years earlier, but we were also no longer pretending that spending 4 evenings in 1 week together was accidental. Claire made the invitations clear enough that I could not hide behind neighborly obligation, and I kept saying yes because I wanted to. The differences started showing up in small ways. At the market, I bought her a coffee without asking and handed it over while she was looking at handmade ceramic bowls. She took one sip, made a face, and stared at the cup. Vanilla latte. You used to like it. I used to think frozen yogurt was dinner. I looked at the label. So this is wrong? Completely. She was smiling. What do you drink now? Flat white, no syrup. That feels unnecessarily mature. See? She took another sip anyway. You remember me. That does not mean you know me. The line stayed with me because she was right. I had carried around a version of Claire that stopped changing the night she left. She had done the same with me, in ways she was only beginning to discover. She assumed I still rented my house, still took every commercial job offered to me, and still spent Saturday mornings fixing things for half the neighborhood. Some of that was true. Enough of it wasn't. I had bought the house, turned down work that would have kept me traveling most of the year, and taken on a supervisory role with a commercial electrical contractor. I still liked working with my hands, but I had learned that saying yes to every job usually meant someone else got to decide what my life looked like. Claire listened when I told her that over tacos from a place neither of us had tried before. You used to work constantly, she said. I still work constantly, not the same way. You sound disappointed. No. She tore a piece from her tortilla and looked at me. I think I assumed you would be exactly where I left you. That admission made me laugh, because I had made the same mistake. In my head, Claire had stayed 24, restless, ambitious, always talking about the next city and the next project. The woman, sitting across from me, still liked new things, but she no longer seemed impressed by movement for its own sake. She talked about product design with real pride, especially the projects where she could make complicated tools easier for normal people to use. But she also admitted she was tired. Not burned out, not miserable, just tired of building a life that always felt temporary. Seattle is good, she said. That's what makes this annoying. If I hated it, coming back would be easy. I nodded. So don't make it easy. She looked at me. Meaning? Choose what you actually want. Not what gives you the cleanest explanation. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting advice from a man who still hasn't answered whether he missed me. I should have expected that. Roundabout attack. New rule. Old question. Those seem incompatible. Claire smiled. Not if the question still applies. We left it there, but the subject did not disappear. Over the next week, she kept catching me, remembering things I claimed not to have stored. I knew she hated cilantro. I knew she preferred the passenger window cracked, even when the air conditioning was on. I remembered the name of the design professor who had convinced her to apply for the Seattle job. She remembered that I always checked a restaurant's light fixtures without realizing I was doing it, that I hated people touching the radio while I drove, and that I once told her I wanted to buy my house long before I could afford it. Every discovery turned into the same argument. You noticed, she would say. I have a memory. Selective memory. Efficient memory. Convenient memory. The problem was that the teasing was getting easier at the same time. The distinction between past and present was getting harder. One Thursday evening, Claire and I ended up at a small rooftop place downtown after she finished work. She had changed into a dark green dress that made me forget whatever complaint I had been making about parking. She caught me looking before I could pretend otherwise. Careful, she said. You're making a face. What face? The one where you remember something you weren't planning to admit. That joke is getting old. Then give me new material. We ordered drinks and talked until the crowd thinned out. Nothing dramatic happened. That was what made it worse. There was no old memory doing the work for us. We had never been there before. We had never had that conversation before. I simply liked being across the table from her. When I drove her home, I parked between our houses and let the engine idle for a moment. This was good, I said. Claire unbuckled her seatbelt, but did not open the door. Catching up. I knew immediately that I had chosen the wrong phrase. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? We haven't seen each other in 5 years. We're catching up. She turned slightly in the seat. Nolan, we have been catching up for almost 2 weeks. Okay. We know where each other works. We know what changed. We have compared coffee preferences in exhausting detail. Her voice stayed light, but the question underneath it was not. Do you actually think that is still what we're doing? For once, I did not have a technically correct answer ready. Claire waited, still turned toward me in the passenger seat, and I realized she was not going to rescue me by changing the subject. No, I said finally. I don't think we're just catching up. Her expression softened, but she stayed quiet. I looked through the windshield at the 2 houses sitting side by side under the porch lights. I think I've been calling it that because it gives me a category I already understand. Claire nodded once. Better. You grade answers now? Only evasive electricians. I looked at her. Then what do you call this? She smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. 2 nights later, I picked her up for an actual date. Not a walk we had accidentally extended. Not tacos because neither of us wanted to cook. And not another excuse to explore a place because of her new place's rule. I asked her out directly. Chose a small restaurant downtown that neither of us had visited and spent enough time deciding what shirt to wear that I briefly lost respect for myself. Claire came out of Diane's house wearing a navy dress and a light jacket. Looked at me beside the truck and said, "You cleaned it. It was due. You vacuumed the passenger side. Basic maintenance." She opened the door. I see we are already lying on our first date. The restaurant was quieter than I expected, with low lighting and a menu that required Claire to explain 2 ingredients I pretended to recognize. We talked easily at first, because easy conversation had never been our problem. She told me about a product launch that had failed so badly, her team still used its code name as shorthand for bad decisions. I told her about a commercial renovation where somebody had somehow hidden an entire junction box behind decorative stone. She laughed hard enough that the couple at the next table looked over. Nothing about the evening felt like 5 years ago. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me notice how much I wanted the night to go well, for reasons that had nothing to do with unfinished history. Claire noticed me watching her again. "What?" she asked. "I'm allowed to look at my date." That sounded rehearsed. It wasn't. Then answer something unrehearsed. She set down her glass. "What do you like about me now?" I leaned back slightly. That is a suspiciously direct question. You already told me what you remember. I want to know what you see. My first answer arrived too quickly. I told her I still liked how curious she was, how she could turn a 10-minute errand into an hour, how she never seemed intimidated by starting over. Claire listened, then tilted her head. "Those are all things you would have said 5 years ago." I knew she was right. Worse, she knew I knew. I looked down at the table for a moment, then tried again. "You make decisions faster now." Claire stayed still. Not recklessly. "You just don't apologize as much for wanting something." Her expression changed slightly. "You're better at saying when you disagree. You pay attention to whether people mean what they say, which is occasionally exhausting. But I like it. And you don't seem impressed by being busy anymore. 5 years ago, I think movement made you feel successful. Now you care more about whether the thing you're building actually fits your life." Claire's eyes dropped briefly to her glass. "That's more dangerous." "You asked?" "I know." She reached across the table and touched 2 fingers to my wrist. "That's what I wanted to know." I turned my hand beneath hers and she did not move away. "Why?" I asked. Claire looked at our hands before answering. Because I didn't want to come back here and fall for an old memory, just because it was familiar. The words settled between us without drama. And I didn't want you doing that either. I tightened my fingers lightly around hers. I'm not. She studied my face. You sound sure. I am now. Claire smiled, but there was something nervous underneath it I had not seen often since she returned. After dinner, we walked 3 blocks, because neither of us wanted to get back into the truck yet. The street was busy enough that we had to move close together when people passed. Claire slipped her hand into mine without announcing it, and I let myself enjoy how simple that felt. Near a closed bookstore, she stopped and looked through the dark window at a display of travel guides. Can I tell you something embarrassing? She asked. I'm hoping it involves airport security. The first thing I asked you when I got off that plane was not spontaneous. I laughed softly. You planned, did you miss me? On the flight. For how long? Possibly before the flight. I turned toward her. Claire folded her arms, suddenly looking less certain than she had at any point since coming home. When I left 5 years ago, I kept wondering if I had imagined what was happening between us. We never said anything. We never did anything. Then enough time passed that asking felt ridiculous. She looked down the street. So, when Mom told me you were picking me up, I decided I was going to find out within the first 5 minutes whether it had mattered to you at all. I smiled. You gave me about 30 seconds. I got nervous. That was you nervous? Very. I stepped closer. Then for the record, it mattered. Claire looked up at me. You missed me. There was the question again, but it sounded different now. No teasing shield, no airport reunion energy, no challenge hidden inside it. I could have told her yes and ended the conversation. Instead, I said, I did, but I don't want to date the woman I missed 5 years ago. Her eyebrows lifted. That took a turn. I want to date you, the woman standing here now, who makes me answer questions I would prefer to avoid, and has apparently spent 5 years becoming even more difficult. Claire smiled slowly. Much better. I touched her cheek, giving her enough time to decide whether this was actually where she wanted the conversation to go. Claire closed the last bit of distance herself. The kiss was warm, unhurried, and much less dramatic than the version I had imagined years earlier, which somehow made it better. When we separated, she stayed close, one hand resting lightly against my chest. So, she said, still catching up? I laughed. Definitely not. Good. She kissed me once more, shorter this time, then took my hand and started walking again, like the decision had already become part of the night. 2 days later, Claire knocked on my door, just after I got home from work. She had her laptop under one arm, and a look on her face that told me this was not a casual visit. I let her in, and she put the laptop on my kitchen table without opening it. My company approved permanent remote work, she said. That's good, right? Mostly. She sat down. I have until Friday to choose my official base. I knew the answer before she said it. Denver or Seattle? Claire nodded. And this time, Nolan, I'm not asking you what I should choose. Claire sat at my kitchen table with both hands around a glass of water she had barely touched. Seattle still makes sense, she said. My closest friends are there. I know the city. I know how my life works there. Denver makes sense too, just for different reasons. I leaned against the counter and listened. She talked through the practical parts, without turning the conversation into a spreadsheet. Her mother was here. The cost of living was easier. She liked being closer to family without feeling trapped by it. Denver also felt slower in ways she had once mistaken for boring, and now found appealing. None of that was really the question sitting between us. Claire looked at me after a minute and said, Do you want me here? It was such a clean question that I almost respected it enough to answer badly. I want you wherever you'll be happiest. Claire closed her eyes for half a second. That is not what I asked. I know. Then answer what I asked. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I don't want you choosing a city because of me after 3 weeks. Also not what I asked. Claire. Nolan. She leaned forward slightly. I am not asking you to make the decision. I am asking whether you personally want me in Denver. Her voice stayed calm, which made it harder to dodge. You keep acting like telling me what you want is somehow the same thing as controlling what I do. I looked down at the table. She was right, and I hated how quickly I knew it. I'm trying not to put weight on the scale. You're already on the scale. I looked up. That sounds more dramatic than I expected from you. It's accurate. She touched one finger to the tabletop between us. You exist. We're dating. I like you. Pretending none of that affects how Denver feels does not make me more independent. It just means you're refusing to tell me what your side of this is. I sat back. I don't want you staying, because I said I want you here. Then trust me enough to hear what you want, and still make my own decision. That landed harder than I expected. My instinct had always been to remove myself from other people's choices whenever the outcome mattered to me. It felt respectful. Clean. If I did not say what I wanted, nobody could accuse me of pushing. Claire saw the problem immediately. You did this at the airport too, she said. I asked if you missed me, and you gave me an answer that was technically true and emotionally useless. I laughed once, despite myself. That is harsh. It is also becoming a pattern. She was not angry. That somehow made it worse. I'm not asking you to promise something huge. I'm asking whether the idea of me leaving again bothers you. Yes, I said. Claire went still. I continued before I could retreat into a safer explanation. Yes, it bothers me. I want you here. I like walking out my front door and knowing you're next door. I like that you show up with a plan I didn't ask for, and somehow I usually go anyway. I like that I don't have to schedule 3 weeks ahead to see you. I paused. But I also know that is the easiest version of wanting you. You're close. It's convenient. I don't want to confuse convenience with commitment, any more than you wanted to confuse nostalgia with chemistry. Claire watched me carefully. That's closer. Closer? You answered half the question. You are very demanding. You like that about me now. You said so. I had no defense against my own words. She softened slightly. I don't need you to ask me to stay. I need to know that if I choose Seattle, this doesn't immediately become a nice 6-week story we tell ourselves was always temporary. That was the part I had not fully considered. Somewhere in my head, I had treated her decision like a verdict on the relationship without admitting it. Denver meant possibility. Seattle meant distance. Distance meant complicated. And complicated was where people usually started explaining why timing was bad. Claire was asking whether I wanted her enough to let the relationship become inconvenient. I don't know exactly what it would look like, I said. Good. Good. Because if you had a polished long-distance plan ready after 3 weeks, I'd be concerned. I smiled. Fair. She reached across the table and touched my hand. I just need you to stop protecting me from information that belongs to me. I turned my hand under hers. You're going to make the decision yourself? Absolutely. And if I say I want you here, you won't treat that like an instruction? Absolutely not. I took a breath. Then yes, I want you here. Claire's eyes changed, not dramatically, just enough that I saw what she had been waiting for. Thank you. That felt suspiciously simple. It was. I dislike this lesson. You'll survive. We did not turn the rest of the evening into a crisis meeting. That mattered. Claire stayed for another hour. We ordered Thai food, argued about whether one of the dishes was actually spicy, and talked about everything except cities for a while. When she left, she kissed me at the door and said, I'm making the decision tomorrow. Do you want company? No. I nodded. Okay. She smiled. That answer was perfect. Please document the occasion. The next day was Thursday. Claire worked from Diane's dining room, while I spent most of the day on a commercial renovation downtown. I did not text her asking what she had decided. I also did not pretend I was not thinking about it. By lunch, I had checked my phone enough times that one of the apprentices asked whether I was expecting inspection results. Something like that, I said. The truth was that for the first time since Claire came back, I had no role in what happened next. She had asked what I wanted. I had told her. Now the decision belonged entirely to her. That should have made me feel powerless. Instead, it clarified something I had been avoiding. Whether Claire chose Denver or Seattle, I did not want the relationship to end because geography stopped making it convenient. I thought about what 3 hours of flying actually meant, how often I could realistically get long weekends, what my work schedule looked like over the next month, and how quickly I could stop treating distance like a theoretical problem. I did not build a master plan. I just made one concrete choice. Friday morning, before Claire's deadline, and before her scheduled return flight to Seattle, I asked my supervisor for a long weekend 3 weeks out. Then I bought a refundable ticket to Seattle. That evening, I walked next door to Diane's house. Claire answered before I knocked twice. She looked at me, then at the envelope in my hand. "What is that?" "Not a speech. Good start." I handed it to her. Inside was the printed flight confirmation. Claire read it once, then looked up. "Seattle, 3 weeks from now. You don't even know what I chose." Exactly. Her expression changed. "Nolan." I met her eyes. "If you leave tomorrow, I'm still coming." For the first time since she came home, Claire had no immediate answer. Claire stared at the flight confirmation long enough that I started wondering whether buying a plane ticket had somehow been more dramatic than I intended. Then she looked at me. "You really bought this before you knew what I picked?" I nodded. "Refundable. I'm romantic, not financially irresponsible." That earned the smallest laugh. She looked back at the page. "Why Seattle?" "Because if you choose Seattle, I don't want the first conversation after you leave to be about whether this is worth the trouble. I want you to know I already decided it is." Claire's expression softened, but I kept going before she could answer for me. "And if you chose Denver, I still want to go. You built a life there for 5 years. Your friends are there. The places you love are there. If I'm going to know who you are now, I probably shouldn't only know the version of you that came back here." She folded the confirmation and held it against her chest. "You know, you could have just said you wanted me to stay." "I did say that. Eventually. I'm improving." Claire smiled. Slowly. I stepped onto the porch beside her. Diane was somewhere inside talking on the phone, and the neighborhood was quiet except for a lawn sprinkler, clicking 2 houses down. "I meant what I said yesterday," I told her. "I want you in Denver. I would miss you if you left, but I don't want Denver to win, because I'm standing next door making the alternative feel harder." Claire looked at me for a moment, then reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a key attached to a plain silver tag. "Good," she said, "because I signed a lease this afternoon." For several seconds, I just stared at the key. Denver? Denver. Relief hit me so quickly that I laughed. Claire laughed too, then held up one finger before I could say anything stupid. "Not here. I wasn't going to suggest moving into your mother's basement. Not next door either. There goes my plan to communicate entirely by waving through windows." She shook her head. "I found an apartment in Rhino. 20 minutes from here, when traffic is decent, considerably longer, when Denver remembers, it has too many cars." I took the key from her long enough to look at the tag. "You already picked a place?" "Yesterday. Before you asked whether I wanted you here, I had narrowed it down. I signed today." She watched my reaction carefully. I needed to know I was choosing Denver because I wanted Denver, not because moving back into Mom's house and dating the man next door was easy. That made more sense than I wanted to admit. So I wasn't the deciding factor. You were a factor. She stepped closer, a significant one. But I also want my mother nearby, without living in her guest room. I want the friends I've been neglecting here. I like my work better now. that I'm not tied to one office, and I realized I've spent years assuming going back somewhere meant I had failed to move forward. She glanced at the key in my hand. This doesn't feel like going backward. I handed it to her. Good. Claire narrowed her eyes. That's all? What do you want? A victory speech. Maybe a little excitement. I put my hands lightly around her waist and pulled her closer. I am extremely excited. Better. I was trying to behave like a stable adult. Overrated. I kissed her, and she leaned into me, without any of the uncertainty that had followed us through those first few weeks. It was not the kind of moment that needed fireworks or a dramatic soundtrack. Claire had made her choice. I had made mine before I knew hers. That was enough. When we separated, she tapped the folded flight confirmation against my chest. Keep this trip. I plan to. My friends in Seattle are going to want proof you exist. Your mother has probably already sent photos. Mom has terrible angles. Finally, something serious to worry about. Claire flew back to Seattle the next morning to finish packing and close out the apartment she had lived in for 4 years. I drove her to the airport again. This time she did not ask whether I would miss her. She knew. I also knew she would be back in 12 days, which made the goodbye easier, without making it meaningless. Before she went through security, she kissed me and said, 3 weeks. Seattle. I have the ticket. I know. I'm checking whether you'll invent a practical reason to cancel. I'm going to inspect regional electrical standards. Claire smiled. There he is. I caught her hand before she stepped away. I'll be there. Her teasing expression softened. I know. The next 12 days were the first real test of whether we had built anything beyond proximity. Nothing dramatic happened. We talked at night when our schedules lined up. Sometimes the conversation lasted an hour. Sometimes Claire called while folding clothes, and I listened to her complain about how she had somehow accumulated 6 different phone chargers. I sent her a photo when Diane's maple tree finally dropped another branch onto my fence. She accused me of staging it for nostalgia. I told her the tree had stronger dramatic instincts than either of us. What mattered was that neither of us treated distance like an emergency. We simply kept choosing contact without needing the house next door to create it for us. When Claire returned, she moved into her new apartment instead of back into Diane's place. I helped with the heavy furniture because I owned a truck and had functioning shoulders. But I did not turn the move into proof that I belonged there. Claire had hired movers. She had already chosen where the furniture went. She had a list taped to the refrigerator that made my organizational habits look amateur. At one point, I picked up a box labeled office and asked where she wanted it. She pointed down the hall. Second door. Any specific placement? Nolan. Just checking. Put the box down before you redesign my floor plan. I obeyed. Mostly. 3 weeks later, I used the Seattle ticket. Claire took me to the coffee shop, where she had spent half her 20s working on designs, introduced me to friends who had heard enough stories about me to be immediately suspicious, and showed me an apartment building she had almost moved into. Before deciding to come home, seeing the city through her made something obvious. Claire had not spent 5 years waiting to return to Denver. She had lived. She had changed. She had built friendships, habits, confidence, and a version of herself that did not belong to me or to the neighborhood where we first met. Being invited into that part of her life felt more intimate than any attempt to recreate the past. A month after she moved, I picked her up from her apartment for dinner. By then, our relationship had developed ordinary habits of its own. Claire left sunglasses in my truck. I kept the sparkling water she liked in my refrigerator. She had learned that if she asked me whether I wanted something directly, I would answer directly, although she still occasionally accused me of needing supervision. That evening, she climbed into the passenger seat, adjusted the air vent, and looked at me with an expression I recognized immediately. "It's been 3 days," she said. "Did you miss me?" 5 years earlier, I probably would have explained that 3 days was not very long. At the airport, I had said I noticed she was gone. This time, I didn't need the technically correct version. Yeah, I said. I did. Claire smiled and buckled her seatbelt. That was fast. I've been practicing. Should I ask again tomorrow? Don't abuse the system. She laughed, and I pulled away from the curb. The strange thing was that missing Claire had never been the important part. People miss places, versions of themselves, and people they never intend to return to. What mattered was what happened after she came back. We stopped treating an unfinished memory like proof that we belonged together and started making choices in the present that gave us an actual relationship to keep. If you were in Nolan's position, would you have told Claire you wanted her to stay, or would you have worried that saying it might influence her decision? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.